The night started out as one of those predictably bad nights with nothing but pain and anger to chew on, and then it got decidedly worse. Or was it better? I suppose that depends on exactly how much anger I had gnawing at my gut, and I must admit there was a lot. It was about 10 o'clock, and I was sitting in an otherwise darkened house with just a floor lamp beside my chair to give me light. I'd been working on my task for several hours, and I was unaware of the darkness beyond the artificial universe that extended just feet from my chair. It suited my mood perfectly. My legs were crossed, and I had a yellow legal pad in my lap where I was making lists and taking notes. I was well into it when the doorbell rang. Looking up, still unaware of the time, I noticed the darkened house for the first time and thought, who the heck could that be at this time of night? I was pretty darn sure it wasn't my wife since she hadn't been home that early on a girls' night out in months. I set the legal pad on the floor and dropped the pen on top of it. It was then that I realized how bone-tired I really was. I wasn't tired from the work. It was the soul-crushing reality of my life that left me drained. Making my way to the door, I flicked the two wall switches that turned on the exterior and hallway lights. A quick glance out the peephole in the door showed me that I had 2 police officers waiting for me, and that is never good. I took a deep breath, opened the door, and asked, "What did I do now?" I was trying to be funny, but they didn't crack a smile. This wasn't going to be a social visit. "Are you George Bradley?" the first officer asked. "Yeah," I replied, trying to be pleasant. "Is your wife Jean Bradley?" he continued. "Right a second time. Can I ask what this is about?" I questioned. "Have you ever noticed how cops never answer your questions?" "May we come in?" Not waiting for an answer, the officer nearest me took a step across the transom. I blocked his way and shook my head. "No." "I beg your pardon?" He seemed surprised. It was like no one had ever said no to him before. "I said no," I stated firmly. "I asked you a question so you can answer it or you can leave." I was rapidly running out of Pleasant. He stepped back, but he didn't answer my question. "Have you been here all night?" the officer pressed. I crossed my arms and looked at him like he was a mess dropped on my porch by that mongrel next door. "Yes, and that's the last answer I'm giving you until you answer my question." "What is this about?" I guess I'd given them enough to think they could make me sweat if they needed to, because they finally answered my question. The senior officer spoke gravely. "Your wife has been injured and has been taken to Memorial Hospital." It's a strange thing that happens to a husband. One minute you're planning your wife's destruction, and the next you're worried about her well-being. "What happened?" I asked, genuinely concerned. They weren't ready to tell me just yet. "May we come in?" the senior officer repeated. That exhaustion was setting in again. I exhaled, stepped back, and motioned for them to enter. They did. I pointed to the living room, the dimly lit living room, and they walked in nervously, like it was a training exercise in one of those shooting galleries. I flicked the ceiling lights on and took my chair. "So now can you tell me what happened?" I demanded. The concern for my wife was wearing off, and I was getting upset. They looked at each other, and the one I assumed was the senior officer said, "Sir, we regret to inform you that your wife was shot this evening." His statement seemed rehearsed, and it occurred to me later that he was watching for my response. The guy was trying to read me. I admit the news hit me hard. "Is she okay?" I asked. "Yes, sir. You may remember that we told you she is at Memorial Hospital," replied the senior officer. I thought for a minute as my head cleared. "No, you said she was taken there. You never said if she is alive or dead. Now answer the question or get the heck out." I was yelling by the time I finished that. Again, they looked at each other, and again, much later, I wondered if they were frustrated at not being able to read me, annoyed at their own inability to intimidate me, or just unsure of how to proceed. The senior officer finally spoke. "Your wife is in surgery now. The outcome is uncertain." To my great surprise, those 2 sentences hit me like a ton of bricks and knocked the wind right out of me. I started hyperventilating, a response that embarrassed me later. When I gathered my wits about me, the two officers were kneeling by my chair saying, "Breathe, breathe," and like a fool I was nodding. My wife was shot? The wretched woman was shot? Who besides me would want to do that? Did I just say that out loud? The two officers were still telling me to breathe, so I assume not. "Is there anything more you can tell me?" I managed to ask. With my own brief crisis behind me, they both stood and resumed the same stance as before, but they were more forthcoming now. The senior officer explained, "Your wife was in a motel room with a gentleman friend. As near as we can figure, his wife must have gained entry somehow. She probably just knocked on the door and he answered it without looking. Anyway, she emptied most of her clip into him and saved the last few for your wife. Fortunately for your wife, his wife doesn't seem to be an accomplished marksman. A few of her shots went wild, but others found their mark well enough. The boyfriend is dead, but they think your wife may make it." Wow. Once they finally start sharing information, they really let you have it all. That's when it hit me. "So you're here to see if I was involved?" I asked. Their expressions gave up none of their thoughts. "We know who did the shooting," the senior officer replied, "but there is always the question of additional involvement. Plus, we need to know that your wife is safe to come home when she's ready." I think that must have been the moment when I first smiled that entire night. "She's been safe the past few weeks, so I don't know why that should change now," I remarked. They both looked at me like I didn't get it. On impulse, I decided to give these two a little gift. I reached down to the side of my chair and the two officers tensed visibly. The younger one even put his hand on his weapon. "Don't wet your underwear, kid. It's just an envelope," I said. I handed them the manila envelope I'd had sitting by my chair and continued. "I saw my lawyer today. She gave me a list of things to do, and, ironically, she told me to make some more lists." With that, I reached to the other side of my chair and held up the legal pad where I'd been making notes on the divorce. The senior officer opened the envelope and began to examine the photographs I had of my wife having intimacy with a man I'd never met. "You fellows want to tell me the name of the man she was with?" I asked. The senior officer spoke without looking up. "It looks like you already know." They were lost in fascination like two boys who just discovered adult videos on the internet. That was when the junior officer spoke up for the first time. "Boy, they really look different without the holes in them," he blurted out. The senior officer reprimanded him in front of me. Then turning to me, the senior officer said, "I'm sorry, sir." That was inappropriate. He's new. I just nodded. I had bigger problems to think about now. My cheating wife was in the hospital. She might make it, or she might not. I suppose the divorce was on hold for a few days or weeks until we knew how things would work themselves out. After repeating that I'd been home all night and remembering a very fortunate call from my brother that helped to establish my alibi, they repeated their admonition that I was not to harm my wife when she returned. I saw no reason to elaborate, so I just repeated my earlier response, and they seemed satisfied. When they were ready to leave, I rose from my chair and showed them out. I turned out the lights as I walked back to my chair, sat, and began to assess this new information. She's been shot. I never saw that coming. As much as I hated her for what she'd done, I never wished her dead. I wanted her to live a lifetime of regret, weeping at night as she lay alone in her bed untouched by a man's hand. As if that were going to happen. I had started the night very deliberately doing the work that my lawyer had assigned me. It was a great way to take my mind off the questions that have been haunting me ever since I realized that my wife was cheating. Now I knew who, but I still had no idea why. Our marriage had its difficult moments, to be sure. She was one of those people who always seemed to be annoyed by something. There were times I could swear she went in search of something to be unhappy about. I had never fully realized that until the preparations for divorce put distance between us and I started to gain perspective. Whatever compelled her to destroy her life had now made me a suspect to some degree in a murder case. The pieces started falling into place, and it was then I realized that I was not alone in this vile mess of lies and betrayal. I called my lawyer's private cell, and she picked up on the fourth ring. "This better be good," Sheila warned, "or so help me, I'm sending you a bill you'll still be paying off with your Social Security checks." Sheila Goldstein was a shark, and I found a strange sense of comfort in her take-no-prisoners attitude. "Who would have known that a divorce lawyer would have a sense of humor?" I replied. "Who says I'm kidding?" she shot back. "I need you to reach out to a criminal lawyer who works nights," I told her. I heard a crash on the phone. "Tell me you didn't do something stupid," Sheila exclaimed. "No, but someone else did," I explained. "I just had a visit from the cops. The jerk's wife caught up with them and shot them both. He's dead and she's in surgery. The wife needs a lawyer, and I'm betting she doesn't have one." "Listen to me," Sheila said firmly. "Tell me you had nothing to do with this, and for God's sake, say it like you mean it." "I had nothing to do with this," I stated. "Now say it like I'm supposed to believe it," she demanded. "I'm telling you the truth. I had nothing to do with it," I insisted. "The cops were here, and they told me about it. I think they were thinking the same thing you're thinking, but I had nothing to do with it." "Okay, so why is this your problem?" Sheila asked. "It isn't, but I guess misery loves company. If we hadn't had that come-to-Jesus discussion in your office, it could well have been me. I just want to help her." I heard a hard, deep breath on the other side of the phone. "Okay," Sheila conceded. "Do you know where she is?" "You mean Helen Smith?" I asked. "Was your wife sleeping with another woman's husband?" "Yes, I mean Helen Smith," Sheila snapped. "I don't know where she is," I admitted, "but they got shot in town and it's a small town, so I'm assuming they have her at the police station." "Okay, you stay put," Sheila instructed. "I'll call an associate and see if he can get down there. If nothing else, he can babysit her until she gets her own lawyer." "I need to go to the hospital at some point," I noted. "Okay, you can go to the hospital, but don't be alone with her," Sheila warned. "If anything happens, I want 10 feet between you and her with at least 2 witnesses." "Got it," I acknowledged. "And George?" Sheila added. "Yes," I responded. "I know you. You're conflicted. I'm sorry for what is happening, but you're not responsible, and it's going to be okay. You hear me?" Her voice softened slightly. "Yes, ma'am. I hear you," I assured her. "Okay. Go do what you need to do, but behave yourself," she concluded. I hung up thinking, did I just say, "Yes, ma'am"? Why does she make me feel like a little kid? And why does it work so well? No matter. She's looking after me at a time when I feel lost, and she gives me direction. Now I needed to make her proud of me. I took a shower and changed. A few weeks ago, I would have rushed to be at her side, but Jean killed that love. Now I just had obligations to fulfill, and that included making sure she got proper medical care, and the hospital got our insurance information. The divorce could wait. I wasn't going to rend my clothes whatever the outcome, but I would finish my husbandly duties by ensuring that strangers did their jobs. As it turned out, I could have taken more time. She was in recovery when I arrived and sedated through the night. I gave them our insurance information, spoke with a surgeon who said that Jean was expected to live, and returned home. They would call me if there was any change or when she was awake. It was long after midnight when I got home. I was exhausted but unable to sleep, so I ran through a mental checklist. Everything could wait until tomorrow except for one very difficult task. I needed to call Jean's parents. I considered waiting until morning, but if she took a turn for the worse and they couldn't say goodbye, they would never forgive me. Whatever I thought of Jean, her parents were always good to me. So I picked up the phone and called. "Hello? Do you know what time it is?" Joe's groggy voice came through the phone. "Yeah, Joe, I know. I had to call," I explained. "Jean has been injured and they've taken her to Memorial Hospital." There was a moment's delay as her father absorbed the information. "Injured? What do you mean, injured?" he asked anxiously. Joe, she was shot tonight by her lover's wife, I said bluntly. Shot? Joe exclaimed. What the heck are you talking about? Are you drunk? How did she get shot? No, Joe, I'm sober, I assured him. The police were here earlier and I've been to the hospital. She's out of surgery and the doctor says she is going to be okay. They have her sedated, so there's no point in going there tonight. I just wanted you to know. Are you with her now? Joe asked. No, I'm home, I replied. Shouldn't you be with her? His tone was accusatory. I was too tired to get angry. Joe, did you hear me? She was shot by her lover's wife, I repeated. You're insane. Jean doesn't have a lover, Joe protested. Yeah, Joe, she does. Or she did, I corrected him. He's dead, but she's going to live. There was silence on the other end of the call, or silence of a sort, as I could hear Joe telling Marie what I'd told him. Eventually, Joe came back to the call. George, is there any chance you could be mistaken? He asked hopefully. About the cheating or the shooting? I clarified. Well, both, Joe exclaimed. No, Joe, I got suspicious and hired someone to watch her about 2 weeks ago, I explained. I was looking at photographs and transcripts when the police got here. I've been to the hospital and talked with her doctor. It's all true. There was silence again. What are you going to do? Joe finally asked. I'm sorry, Joe. I've already been to a lawyer. I'm divorcing her, I stated. George, can't you find it in your heart? Joe pleaded. I mean, she's been shot, and she's going to need you. I needed her too, Joe, but she was out sleeping with her lover, I reminded him. So that's it? Joe asked dejectedly. Basically, I confirmed. I'll make sure she is insured through all this, and I'm sure the lawyers will have more to say about finances and such, but I've been lied to too many times. In some ways, that's worse than the intimacy. She has lied right to my face, and she did it so well that I never knew. I never suspected. It took a moment for Joe to absorb that. So, what tipped you off? He inquired. It was just her being away all the time, I explained. We used to do things together, but these past few months she's always making plans that don't include me. I figured that I needed to see for myself, so I hired a guy, and he showed me what Jean was hiding from me. After that, my mind was made up. You know, her mom and I were looking forward to having grandkids, Joe said softly. He sounded like a beaten man, and it cut me to the core. I knew they wanted grandchildren, and I wanted us to give them grandkids. I'm sorry, Joe. I really am, I said sincerely. Will you do us one favor? Joe asked. I thought, here it comes. They want me to delay any decision until Jean is better and we can talk. To my surprise, that wasn't it. Don't be a stranger, Joe requested. Marie and I think of you as the son we never had. I don't want to lose you even if you divorce our daughter. I couldn't believe my ears. Through all that had happened, the betrayal, the evidence, the lawyer, the shooting, all of it, this is what made me cry for the first time. I love you guys too, Joe. I really do. I promise I'm not going anyplace, I assured him. With that, we hung up. If I was bone-tired before, I was exhausted now. I lay down in my bed with my clothes still on and fell fast asleep. The morning sun woke me, but I wasn't ready to rise. I got up just long enough to pull the shade, strip, and climb back into bed for another 2 hours of much-needed but restless sleep. When I could sleep no more, I showered, dressed, and headed out for a bite before going to the hospital. It was about 11 when I got to Jean's room. Her parents were already there. She was awake and surprisingly alert. I expected her to be still sedated or drugged or something, but what did I know? I've never seen a gunshot victim before. I walked into her room expecting remorse. Boy, was I surprised. She took one look at me and exploded. You jerk! You son of a gun! You killed him, didn't you? You killed David! Jean screamed. So much for, it was just intimacy. It didn't mean anything. Suddenly, there were 2 nurses in the room walking quickly past me and 2 orderlies standing next to me. I guess they viewed me as a threat. I looked at her without an ounce of compassion in my heart. "No, his wife killed him," I replied coldly. "I guess you two got sloppy, or maybe she's just smarter than I am." That took the wind out of her sails. She lay back in her bed, and she began to weep. I was soon told to leave and happy to oblige. Walking down the hall, I wondered if I ever knew this woman. She clearly never knew me. As I approached the elevator, I was met by 2 security guards. "Sir, may we speak with you?" one of them asked. I looked at them and said, "No, you may not. I have already spoken with the police, and they have cleared me. I am not going to let the screams of a lying, cheating woman give you permission to pretend you have any importance at all. You can call the police if you want, and I'll speak with them, but you'll just look like fools. It's your call, but if you touch me, I'll sue." By this point, I'd had enough. Tweedledee and Tweedledum looked at each other, not knowing what to do as I stepped into the elevator to leave. The police never bothered me again. Jean tried to get the police to charge me, but when the shooter is caught standing over the body and confesses repeatedly on the way to the station, there wasn't much more for them to do. The lawyer I hired for Helen Smith managed to get her into a psych ward instead of a prison cell, but I sometimes wonder if there is much difference. I visit her from time to time, and I find her as lucid as anyone I know. She once asked me, "Any chance you could smuggle in a hacksaw hidden in a box of chocolates?" That's when I knew she was as sane as you or I. I guess that lawyer was pretty good after all. The divorce went through without much struggle. Jean didn't want me anymore, but she wanted everything we had and everything I would ever have. She had to settle for half and no alimony. The judge was unimpressed with her demands, telling her, "You have a job, Mrs. Bradley. You can work." I'm thinking about having those words tattooed on my arm. Looking back, what I remember most is a terrific lawyer who treated me like a child, guided me, scolded me, and kept me out of trouble, 2 great in-laws that I still feel close to, and a judge with a lot of common sense. As for the ex-wife, I hardly think of her at all. And that's the end of today's story. If you enjoyed it, please give this video a thumbs up and drop a comment below. Your support helps the algorithm push my content further. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps me keep creating more stories for you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Who would have thought that the birth of my first grandchild would lead to the possible destruction of my 24-year marriage to Jane? I'm sitting in the back of this rented utility van, just up the street from my daughter's home, hoping what happens next doesn't finish what I considered a very loving and wonderful marriage. According to my daughter Sarah, Jane typically goes for a long jog around noon on the days she visits her grandson. Sarah says Jane comes back after an hour or so and looks fairly flushed from her workout. I'm here to see what Jane's workout consists of. My name is Bill Jones, and until a month ago I was living the dream. My business is doing great. I'm 47 years old and part owner of a fabrication plant that is on the cusp of a new patent that will revolutionize one of the plastic extrusion processes. If everything goes according to plan, I stand to make a few million on the patent even after sharing the profits with my co-inventor and the 5 investors who backed our development. Besides my work life, I thought my personal life was everything I could ask for. As I said, my wife seemed to love me and our life together. We have 1 child, Sarah, who we're both very proud to call our daughter. Sarah met, married, and got pregnant to a wonderful man 10 years her senior right after graduating from the university. The funny thing about Sarah is how easily she's taken to motherhood and being a full-time homemaker. Here's a girl, a woman really, but she'll always be my girl, who graduated with honors and had every intention of taking the financial world by storm. Sarah's graduation present from her mom and me was a full 6 weeks of touring Europe. It was her reward for finishing college in 3 years, bucking it up while most of her peers spent spring and summer breaks on the beach. Sarah met her future husband in Europe. She claims it was love at first sight, something she wouldn't have considered possible before that first evening in Madrid. She also claims it was fate. Jim Taylor was from Jane's hometown of Olympia. When Sarah returned from her European tour, she moved into her grandparents' house, Jane's folks, and within 6 months she was engaged to Jim, Within 18 months, she was married and pregnant with our first grandchild. Jane couldn't have been more excited. She immediately cut her hours at work so she could spend time with Sarah and the baby. Okay, so now you know my work life is great. I'm a very happy papa or grandpa or father-in-law. That brings us to my marriage to Jane. Jane and I met at the University of Washington. I was a senior and Jane had transferred in from Washington State. We had a class together, one of those entry-level classes required to graduate. Jane was, and still is, a very attractive woman. She's 5 foot 8 inches, athletically built. She's been a runner since high school, with a great smile and beautiful hazel eyes. I was smitten the first day I saw her, but our few conversations after class led me to back off since she seemed reserved. By the time the quarter ended, I worked up enough courage and she accepted my invitation to go out. One date led to another and things were looking good for a long-term romance. I found out the reason for her reservation after our 3rd or 4th date. She was getting over a very bad breakup. Jane caught the boy she dated for 2 years in high school and 2 years at WSU in bed with another girl. Jane humiliated herself by accepting his indiscretion for almost 3 months before finally giving him an ultimatum. He had to choose. This guy was pretty full of himself by this time and blatantly chose both, suggesting a 3-way. Jane had enough, left school soon after, and transferred to the university. I guess that made me a rebound romance. The subject seemed to hurt Jane and it was never brought up again. I'm fairly certain Jane and I had a pretty good marriage and that she was a faithful, loving wife for the next 23 years. Although there were minor disagreements from time to time, we never went to bed without working those problems out and at least kissing each other goodnight. I never strayed, sure I looked sometimes, but was never tempted to ruin a good thing by crossing that line. Jane caught me once in a while eyeing a woman at the beach or on the dance floor. She'd lightly slug my shoulder and say, "Remember, you can look, but not for too long and never touch." She always did this with a smile and a gleam in those eyes. So, what happened? When Sarah had her son, William, Jane decided she needed to spend time with Sarah and Bill Jr., as we call him. One day a week, Jane would get in her car and drive 60 miles from our home in North Seattle to Olympia. Not far by measured miles, but anyone who's driven that stretch knows it takes hours to go from point A to point B. After a couple of months of driving back and forth on the same day, and with winter coming on, Sarah bought a daybed and put it in their study so Jane could spend the night. Jane could drive south in the morning of the first day and come home prior to rush hour on the second. I used the evenings Jane was away to work on the patent. This new routine worked out so well that Jane continued to stay overnight in Olympia even after the weather improved the next spring. Saturday, June 27th, was Bill Jr.'s first birthday. Sarah and Jim planned a barbecue in their large backyard to celebrate the event. 2 minor incidents occurred during the picnic. Both played a role in putting the pieces of this mystery together. I was sitting in a nice lounge chair having a cold beer when Jim and Sarah joined me. They caught me staring at Jane. Jim was the first to speak. "You're a lucky man, Dad." I must admit that I took my father's advice and looked at Sarah's mother to see how my future wife would look when she's 40 before proposing. Sarah gave him a slug on the shoulder, just like her mom always did to me. "You pig? I can't believe you'd say such a thing. What if my mother wasn't such a babe? Would you have dumped me?" I tried to save Jim. "It's true, Sarah. I did the same thing. One look at your grandmother convinced me that your mom was a keeper." With that, Sarah gave me a punch on my shoulder. "Okay, Dad, but what are we girls supposed to do? Look at your fathers." "In that case, I better like looking at a shiny bald head." The 3 of us looked over at Jim's dad manning the barbecue and laughed. Jim's dad is a great guy and good-looking, but he's fighting the male baldness thing by letting his hair grow and trying to comb it over. Right now, the wind was blowing it around, and he looked like a certain future president. "Well, anyway, you're right, Jim. I'm a lucky man. How many men are married to a 45-year-old woman who has the body of a 30-year-old? Sarah replied. "She should be in good shape with all the running she does. Every day she's here, Mom takes off by noon and spends at least an hour running to the waterfront and back. I don't know how she can do it." "Yeah, she runs at least 4 days a week at home. Once or twice a week I go out with her and she runs me ragged. She'll do 4 miles at a 7-minute mile pace. I think she's going to try for the half marathon this fall. You have to hand it to her." About this time, Jim's dad, Jeff, called everyone over and started serving the grilled corn on the cob and burgers, including some surprisingly good veggie burgers, the first I've ever tasted. I sat with Jeff and Jim, and we compared work notes. Jeff had a restaurant supply business and he was grooming Jim to take over when it was time to retire in 10 years or so. After the meal, I went inside to grab a few beers for the three of us, and just before I walked out the patio door, something caught my eye in the house behind Jim and Sarah's. I took a step back into the house and focused my eyes. Sure enough, Jim and Sarah's backyard neighbor was standing at an upstairs window looking over into our yard with a set of binoculars. I couldn't tell for certain, but it looked as if he was watching the table where Jane, Sarah, and Jim's mom were sitting. As I moved back through the patio door, the neighbor quickly lowered the binoculars and stepped back from the window. "Jim, what's the deal with the neighbor behind you?" I just saw him staring over here with binoculars. Both Jim and Jeff took their beers and gave me a look like, "What the hell? That's Alan Ross? He's actually a salesman for one of our main vendors and the guy gives me the creeps. We had a neighborhood watch block party last year, and even though the guy doesn't live on our block, he shows up." Everyone thought it was a bit strange. I caught him more than once staring at Sarah, so I went over and talked to him. He of course recognized me, was surprised we were neighbors, and apologized. He said Sarah reminded him of someone he knew back in high school. I let it go, but it was strange. "Well, I hope you keep the curtains in your back bedroom closed." What an asshole. But something about this rang a small bell in my head. It was a long afternoon, and by the time Jane and I headed home, I forgot about the kid's neighbor. It wasn't until Sunday morning that I remembered. Jane was out on one of her runs and I was having my second cup of coffee, so I went over to the bookcase and pulled out one of Jane's high school yearbooks. We keep all that nostalgic stuff with the photo albums in the den. I looked up the name Alan Ross, and much to my surprise, there was a handwritten note in the margin. "Jane, it's been 2 great years with you. And just as your favorite song says, we've only just begun. I am looking forward to next year at WSU and all the years after. Your love forever, Al." So, it was Jane's old boyfriend who was living right behind Sarah and Jim. Did she know? If she knew, why didn't she say anything? These and dozens of other questions swirled around in my head until Jane came home and took her shower. By the time she came downstairs, I had a fruit and yogurt smoothie waiting for her. As usual, Jane had that fresh, flushed, and glowing look about her. She looked so beautiful, I almost chickened out, but I sucked in my breath and asked the million-dollar question. "Jane, do you know an Alan Ross?" Jane's answer was so fluid, in retrospect, it was almost as if she anticipated the question and was ready with her answer. "I knew an Alan Ross in high school. We even dated for a while. Why do you ask?" Jane's answer took me by surprise, and I decided to play the rest of the hand close to the vest. "He lives behind Sarah and Jim." When Jim caught Ross looking at Sarah, he called him out, and Ross said she reminded him of a girl he knew in high school. Given how much Sarah looks like you at that age, I wondered if you weren't the girl he was talking about. It could be. But why bring it up? Did something happen? Not really, but I think I saw him watching us from his house yesterday. It just seemed a little odd, that's all. Then events cascaded to this moment with me sitting in this rented van. First, the next time I went into the den, Jane's senior year yearbook was no longer on the shelf. It was like a punch to the stomach. I had to sit down in my leather chair and catch my breath. What the hell is going on? That's when Sarah's comment at yesterday's lunch came screaming back into my brain. Every day Mom takes off for an hour to run, the implications were too awful to contemplate. My Jane with another man? Should I confront Jane? Should I talk to Sarah? Or maybe hire a private detective? I remember reading something where someone asked the question, you have to ask yourself, will you be better off without her? I didn't think I could tolerate Jane's adultery, but would I divorce her? That's a question I couldn't answer that night, especially with what little information I had. I went upstairs, took a sleeping pill, and went to bed. I don't even remember if I kissed Jane goodnight, but I must have because she didn't bring it up Monday at breakfast. For the next 2 days, things were way too hectic at work to consider my personal issues. Our investors were in town Monday and Tuesday to chart our progress on the patent. It would be impossible to answer their questions and at the same time try to come up with a plan of action related to my marriage. I'd have plenty of time once the investors left Tuesday afternoon. I sucked it up and got to work. Late Tuesday afternoon, I dropped the investors off at SeaTac. As I headed back to the house I called Jane's cell, she was spending Tuesday and Wednesday at Sarah's. When Jane didn't answer her cell, I called Sarah. "Sarah, hi. I tried to call your mom, but she didn't pick up. Is she there?" No, Dad. Mom went over to Cindy Sullivan's tonight. I think she's an old classmate of Mom's. Funny, she never talked about her before. Is this a regular thing with Cindy? Not regular, maybe every few weeks she goes and meets someone she knew when she lived here. She's usually home by 10 unless she's had too much wine and spends the night. Mom says it's always nice to get together with the women she grew up with. She says she still feels closer to the small-town girls than she does to the women up in Seattle. After living here in Olympia for the past 3 years, I can see her point. Yeah, it's too bad your mom never really clicked with the Nordstrom crowd. She always has been more comfortable in jeans and boots. Maybe when I retire, we can make that happen. Make it soon, Dad. Jim and I are planning to have more babies, and it would be nice if all 4 of their grandparents lived close by. Sarah, you never cease to amaze me. I never dreamed my ambitious little go-getter would be talking about having a passel of kids. Just found my dream guy and found out I like being a mom. You and Mom can take most of the blame. Okay, Sarah. I'm pulling into the drive now. It's a nice night, and I think I'm going to jump on the Harley and take a long ride this evening. Tell your mother I won't be answering my phone because I'm on the bike. Good night, Dad. Ride safe. It was a nice night for a ride, and I had a destination in mind for this evening's ride. By the time I pulled into Alan Ross's neighborhood, it was dark. Just enough light as I rode slowly past his house to see a red Mustang Boss 429 in the drive in front of the 2-car garage, and no sign of Jane's Volvo. I was just about ready to give the bike some throttle when something made me pause. The license plate was one of those vanity plates the state sold for a premium. It had a WSU Cougar emblem on the plate, and the license number was Ross Boss. Why would a guy park his expensive sports car in the drive instead of in the garage? I rode a block and a half down the street to a school. It had one of those circular drives in front of the school buses. I parked the bike and pretended to do some repairs on the Harley. I had the seat off, just in case. I kept an eye on Ross's house while I pretended to fiddle away. Lucky thing, too. Olympia is still a small enough town that a guy on a motorcycle can attract attention. Within a half hour, a police officer stopped nearby. Need anything? Need anything? Not really, but thanks for asking, officer. I thought maybe I had a short in the electrical system, but it turns out the last mechanic didn't tighten the negative cable on the battery. I'm just finishing up and I'll be gone in 10 minutes. I made certain to look the officer in the eye while we chatted. What ya going to do if that doesn't fix it? He asked. My daughter and her husband live on 3rd. I'll just walk it down there. But I think I have it. Thanks again. The cop took off, but I saw him cruise by a few streets down when I was putting on my helmet. The bike was started and the headlight was on, so he left me alone. It was very dark now and Ross's Mustang hadn't moved. The next bit was going to be tricky and maybe more than embarrassing if I was wrong and got caught. I started toward Ross's house with enough speed to cut the engine and coast to the front of his house. I stopped the bike, ran up the driveway, and had to get on my toes to look inside the garage through the windows near the top of the garage door. On the right side was a Mercedes S-Class convertible, and on the left side was my wife's Volvo. I don't know how I did it. Maybe the past 3 days led me to believe that I'd find exactly what I did find, and it wasn't as much of a surprise. But I had the presence of mind to jog back to the Harley, fire it up, and take off like a bat out of hell. I rode for 20 minutes, pulled into a tavern near the military base, and took out my cell. This time Jane picked up. Hi, Bill. Sarah said you were out riding tonight. Are you home? Almost. How about you? What are you up to? I asked. I'm over at Cindy Sullivan's, an old friend from grade and high school. I think I'll end up spending the night here. I've had a couple of glasses of wine and I think I'm over the limit. I feel okay, just don't want to take a chance. That's good thinking. Listen, I needed to talk to you tonight because the meeting with the investors ran into a couple of snags. I'm flying out tomorrow and won't be back until this all gets straightened out. Sorry to spring this on you at the last minute. Oh, Bill, I'm going to miss you. If you're going to be out of town, is it okay if I stay here in Olympia until you get back? You know how much I hate staying home by myself. No, you go ahead and stay with Sarah. I'll give you a heads up before flying home. It should be Saturday at the latest. Bye. Bye, Bill, I love you. Damn, why did she have to go and say that? It just made her betrayal that much worse. I really wasn't going out of town, of course. I just didn't want to deal with Jane while I set up the rest of my life. I rode home trying to see through a couple of misty eyes. I don't think I'm a pussy, But I'm not ashamed to say a few tears fell and quite a few curse words crossed my lips while thinking about 25 years with the woman I loved more than myself, the mother of my daughter and the grandmother of our beautiful grandson. I wondered if my life would ever be happy again. Wednesday, I called my business partner, explained the situation, and told him I'd be out for a few days. He was sympathetic and said the usual nice things to commiserate, but deep down he was probably thinking how this would affect our deal. I can't say I blame him if that's really what was on his mind. We were so close to making a small fortune, and here I am dumping a load on top of it. Then a call to our lawyer for a reference for a divorce attorney, making certain he knew it had to be a very good one, maybe the best. There was no way I would split millions with a cheating whore who may end up with an asshole, spending my money on cars and whatever. The attorney I was referred to understood the urgency of the situation and agreed to meet me that evening in his office. He was upfront about it. I could count on paying him a handsome premium for the after-hours meeting to clear his calendar and expedite the paperwork, but he assured me it would be worth my money. I checked into a local hotel and called Jane at noon. Of course, she didn't answer. Whether she was actually running or was jumping Ross's bones at that moment was irrelevant. I just wanted to avoid any conversation. I left her a message that I'd be tied up in meetings, but would call her tonight. When I met with the attorney that evening, he had his act together, obviously not his first time dealing with this situation. He listened to my tale of woe and my desire to go forward without getting scalped. He said the paperwork would be ready by Friday morning and gave me the getting separated checklist. Accounts to close, items to label, how I wanted to handle notifying Jane, etc. When he heard my plan for giving Jane the divorce papers, he started to shake his head. I assured him I could do it without ending up in jail. He said he still advised against it, but he could understand my motivation. Just don't be stupid. Thursday, I went down the checklist. One credit card was left open, the one Jane carried, but the credit line was reduced from $30,000 to $10,000. We paid off the balance every month, so there was little danger this would alert Jane before the day of reckoning. Friday morning at 8 a.m. I was sitting in the attorney's lobby. He almost smiled when he walked in the door. He went right to his desk and handed me the envelope sitting there with my name on it. I signed where I needed to, and he reminded me as I walked out the door, remember. I said, don't be stupid. I drove to the rental car office at SeaTac on my way south to Olympia and drove away with a white utility van. Here I sit down the block from Alan Ross's house, waiting to see if this is the day my marriage blows up forever. At 1:45, Jane comes around the corner wearing her jogging gear. She heads toward Ross's house, up the steps, reaches under a planter, and lets herself in the door, just like it's her home. At 1:55, Alan Ross pulls up in his Mercedes and parks in the garage. At 1:56, I drive the van over to Sarah's house. Sarah is surprised to see me, but not as surprised as when I tell her why I'm there. I tried to tell her in a way that wouldn't shock her, but that's probably unrealistic. I asked her to call her husband Jim and meet us at home as soon as he could get away. I knew when this was over that Sarah would need Jim's strength. No, Dad, no. That just can't be true. Mom loves you. She'd never cheat on you, and I can't be that stupid. If she was cheating, I'd know. You must have it all wrong. Sarah, I'd give anything for it not to be true. I loved your mother for over 25 years. Damn, we were going to celebrate our 25th anniversary next year. But let me tell you what I saw. I told Sarah all the evidence I had so far. Sarah remained reluctant to believe. We picked Bill Jr. out of his crib and took Sarah's car with Jr. in his car seat around the corner and parked in front of Alan Ross's house. Sarah stayed in the car while I went to the front door with the manila envelope. I had to ring and knock before the shithead answered the door in his bathrobe. Who the fuck are you, pleasant guy? I'm Jane's husband. Can you please call her to come to the door? I want to talk to her. He stood there with his mouth hanging open. He tried to shut the door, but I was prepared for that and stuck my foot in the jam. It hurt like hell, but kept the door open. I busted it open with my shoulder and yelled inside, Jane, come here right now. Ross kept pushing on the door, but it wasn't doing him any good because now my torso was in the way. I kept yelling for Jane to come to the door. I don't know how, but I kept my cool and didn't threaten either Ross or Jane, but I did keep shouting for her to come to the door. When Jane finally appeared, she had her jogging gear back on. I'm assuming she was naked when Ross answered the door. She had a frightened look in those eyes I loved. Bill, what's going on? Why are you here? That's not the real question, Jane. The real question is, why are you here? I took this opportunity to grab the lapel of Ross's robe and pull it open. He was naked underneath the robe, of course. Jane looked past me at this moment. The three of us were still standing at the door. I turned around and saw what Jane was staring at. Sarah was out of her car and watching the entire episode. "You had to bring our daughter." The bitch was mad at me. No, she wanted to come because she said there was no way her mother could be cheating on our marriage. She was anxious to prove this was all a figment of my imagination. And you can be pissed at me all you want, but I didn't make this mess, you did. I was starting to lose it, so needed to back out now. I handed Jane the manila envelope. She touched it as if I handed her a live grenade. "I'll be staying with Jim and Sarah tonight. You can stay with your long-lost boyfriend." Read the paperwork. Get a lawyer. Don't come home until you understand what's in those papers and you can abide by the terms. I'll have Jim bring your suitcase and personal items from their house. I don't know what Sarah and Jim are going to do from now on, that's their decision. But you and I are getting a divorce. Goodbye, Jane. I turned and walked away. I thought I heard a wail from Jane, but Ross was slamming the door too hard to tell for certain. "Dad, I'm so sorry. You better drive us back to the house." "I don't think I can make it." Sarah practically collapsed in my arms as I opened the passenger door for her. While my life sucked from that moment and for months to come, I don't think it compared to how much worse it was for Jane. Jim was shocked when he was told about Jane and Alan Ross. He was so pissed that for months he refused to allow Jane in their home or to see her grandson. Sarah didn't argue with Jim. If Jim was pissed, Sarah was livid. I was in their home when Jane called Sarah to talk. Sarah basically called her own mother everything short of unfaithful woman and told Jane that she may never forgive her for breaking her father's heart. Ross lost the Taylor account, and thanks to a call from Jeff Taylor to Ross's boss, eventually lost his job. Ross blamed Jane for his run of bad luck and ended up throwing her out of his house. Jane ended up moving in with her folks. Sarah later told me Jane's mother and father weren't happy with the situation, but realized Jane didn't have too many alternatives until the divorce and the financial settlement was finalized. The divorce was final within 6 months. My battery of lawyers worked it out that Jane doesn't get a thing from the sale of the patent. They were able to shield almost all the money because the patent was sold to a foreign company and my portion was placed in an offshore trust. Don't ask me how. All I know is it cost me 6 figures. This made it all work, but it kept the money out of Jane's hands. She did get plenty, half the sale of our house, half of our savings, but well short of millions. Soon after the divorce, I did get a letter from Jane, but it didn't explain why she cheated. Maybe her excuses made sense to her, but not to me. It contained the usual excuses: empty nest, feeling lonely, needing closure with Ross. What the letter didn't explain was why she would jeopardize what I thought was a great marriage just for such bullshit reasons. Jane reacted poorly to her new reality, the loss of her marriage, the separation from Sarah and Bill Jr., and finally the second separation from Ross. Her behavior became erratic. She started drinking and continued to go downhill. Jane ended up going into rehab at her parents' incident. I suppose most jilted husbands would feel some pleasure from seeing their unfaithful ex-wife get what she deserves, and there are times when a small smile crossed my lips thinking of her suffering. But let's face it, I loved this woman for so many years trying to shield her from pain. How could I just stop caring? Thank goodness for the support I received from my kids. I may have been uneasy about destroying my ex-wife, but I had no qualms about messing with Ross. I got a chuckle out of a couple of things Jim did even after his dad got Ross fired. One evening, Jim looked over the back fence and saw Ross entertaining a young woman. Jim went to the fence, called the woman over, and proceeded to ask how she felt hanging out with a guy who fucked a married woman, then dumped her when the woman needed him. Jim laughed when the woman walked out the side gate. He watched as Ross walked out of his back door carrying 2 wine glasses and looking around the yard for his date. Jim did the same thing a few weeks later when Ross was entertaining a group of friends in his backyard. Jim stood at the fence and asked the group what they thought of their scumbag friend. But the last straw for Ross came a month later when I was helping the kids with their move to a new home. Sarah had to get away from Ross, and they needed a bigger place since Sarah was pregnant again. Ross was out back cutting his lawn. I told Jim to wait a couple of minutes, then start recording the scene on his smartphone, but make certain to put his thumb over the microphone. I jumped over the fence and started to talk to Ross in a low voice. I said a few things to get him riled. Ross was so pissed that he took the bait. Jim caught it on video. I was standing with my hands at my side when Ross took the first swing. I was ready for it and ducked enough to only get clipped. My first roundhouse caught Ross right in the nose. The sound of his nose crunching and the sight of the blood made my heart swell. The second roundhouse caught Ross in the solar plexus. Ross doubled over and began puking. I had to back up fast to avoid getting my shoes covered with his bile. As he leaned over puking, I grabbed his ear, twisted the hell out of it, and whispered, "Next time you won't be so lucky. Next time you'll get seriously hurt." Ross was still doubled over when I walked out of his yard through the front. Somehow his Mercedes got keyed. I immediately went to the police station with Jim. My story was Ross invited me over to his yard. I figured it was to apologize, but when I got there, Ross took a swing at me and I only defended myself. Jim showed the cops his recording and I swore out a complaint of assault. Hours later, Ross got out of the emergency room and headed to the police station to swear out a complaint against me. The whole episode came down to he said, and I ended up walking out of the courthouse scot-free. It's funny, I spent my entire career believing in the win-win philosophy, always looking for a way for both parties to a contract to walk out of the room feeling good. There's nothing win-win in a divorce, at least nothing I can point to. It's definitely lose-lose, no matter how bad you stick it to your cheating ex-spouse. It's been 2 years since that awful afternoon sitting in that rented van. I wish I could say that I met a 30-something bikini model who pledged her everlasting love and fidelity to me, but we all know life isn't really that kind. I had 24 great years with the woman I loved with all my heart. I have 2 great kids, yes, I consider Jim to be a son, and now 2 great grandchildren. Financially, I'm in great shape. Do you know how many men get shafted by the system and end up living in a one-room apartment while supporting a cheating ex-wife? Too many, but at least that's not my fate. No, I have enough money to live comfortably and even travel. I'm currently spending a month touring Italy on a Ducati. Even took in the Moto di pieces in Mugello. But as I sit having an espresso outside a cafe in Florence, I have to fight back the tears. Jane and I always said we'd do this together, tour Italy on a motorcycle with no deadlines and only each other. Now I'm doing it without her. Jane did get out of rehab, but still lives with her parents. Sarah and Jim allow her to visit her grandchildren for no more than an hour every month. I think Sarah does this as a form of torture. She still hasn't forgiven her mother. The question haunts me, how could she do this to us? Life isn't a movie where every question is answered before the credits. It's more like a Joseph Conrad novel. Life just is, and often absurd, and the good guys don't always win. I finish my espresso, put the helmet back on, start the bike, and ride into my own heart of darkness. And that's the end of today's story. If you enjoyed it, please give this video a thumbs up and drop a comment below. Your support helps the algorithm push my content further. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps me keep creating more stories for you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
I'm 27 years old, and my fiancé, whom I'll call L, is 26. My father, who I'll refer to as B, is 52, and my mother, R, is 50. L and I first crossed paths during her freshman year of college, both living in the same dorm building. Coincidentally, we discovered that we lived just 2 towns apart, so I often gave her a ride home during breaks. The extra 20 minutes on the road meant nothing compared to the time we spent together. Our friendship gradually turned into a romantic relationship, and since we both had close-knit families, we introduced each other to our loved ones early on. While I had met her family during those rides home, it was mostly just pleasantries and introductions at the time. Nevertheless, both our families warmly embraced our relationship, and it continued to flourish. I was a year ahead of Elle academically, so after I graduated, I returned home and secured a promising job with an attractive salary. Despite the geographical distance, our bond remained strong, and I frequently visited her at college. Once Elle completed her studies, she moved in with me since our respective jobs were located in the city near our hometowns. Like me, she received an excellent job offer with a generous pay package at her current company. After cohabiting for 3 years, I decided to propose and we eagerly embarked on planning our wedding. Now, let's get to the part you're all here for. In hindsight, there were several red flags that I overlooked, attributing them to my father's desire to welcome Elle into our family. For instance, he frequently called her, and if I was around, they would claim to be discussing upcoming family events or similar topics. I recall one incident when Elle was in the shower and her phone rang. Seeing that it was my father calling, I answered. When he realized it was me, he sounded both surprised and upset. I inquired about the reason for his call, and he mentioned wanting to discuss my mother's upcoming birthday, which was just a week away. Even now, typing this out, I can't help but feel foolish for not seeing through it sooner. On the fateful day when my world turned upside down, everything appeared routine. Elle had Thursdays off, and she prepared breakfast for us as usual. After I left for work, she sent me messages throughout the day, discussing everyday matters like dinner plans and household chores. I realized that I had forgotten some important paperwork needed for a 3 p.m. meeting and decided to head home for lunch to retrieve it. Unbeknownst to her, I didn't inform her of my impromptu return home. Upon arriving home, I noticed a car in our parking lot that resembled my father's. Still, I thought nothing of it, parked my car, and entered our building. As I opened the door to our apartment, I walked right into a scene straight out of a cliched movie. A scenario where a person comes home unexpectedly and catches their partner in the act of infidelity. I stood there in utter shock, a whirlwind of emotions raging within me. Rage, sorrow, disgust. If you were a fly on the wall, you would have seen me frozen in place, unable to move. It felt like an eternity before I regained my composure. Eventually, I took out my phone and began recording. I gathered all the scattered clothes strewn across the floor and hurled them into the hallway outside our apartment. With the camera rolling, I filmed my approach to the bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, and I continued recording for about a minute before switching on the lights. They both jumped at the sudden illumination and turned their shocked gazes toward me. To my absolute astonishment, it was my father lying in bed with Elle. After the initial shock, my father noticed I was recording and began to panic, desperately searching for something to cover himself while pleading with me to stop recording. He eventually found a towel and wrapped it around his waist as he approached me. In response, I warned him that he continued toward me, he might get hurt. He either didn't care or didn't hear me and reached for my phone. That's when I decided to act. I landed a solid punch square on his jaw, causing his head to bounce off the door before he crumpled to the floor. Elle shrieked in shock. I aimed the camera at her and said, "Concerned about your lover, but nothing to say to your fiancé." My father eventually regained consciousness, and I informed them that I had merely come to retrieve something for work and that I would be returning soon. I made it clear that if either of them was still present when I returned, I would share the video with everyone they knew. I ended the recording and addressed my father, telling him that he was dead to me and no longer my father. However, I suggested he go home and speak to my mother because I intended to have a conversation with her soon. I sat in my car for some time, lost in my thoughts, until one of my bosses from work called to inquire about my whereabouts. I assured her that I was on my way back and tried to hide my disheveled state. When I reached her office to deliver the paperwork, she noticed something was amiss and asked what was wrong. I initially brushed it off, claiming it was nothing and that I'd be fine. However, she scrutinized me and noticed some blood on my collar. She rushed to my side, visibly concerned, and pointed out the bleeding. I explained that it was my father's blood and proceeded to show her the video. She watched the footage in its entirety her initial confusion giving way to the realization that my fiancé had cheated on me, with my father no less. She asked if there was anything she could do, suggesting that I take some time off. However, I declined, stating that I couldn't return to work at that moment. Instead, I mentioned having another shirt in my office and assured her that I'd be fine for the meeting. During the meeting, I put on a facade, concealing the turmoil that raged within me. I smiled and engaged with my colleagues as if nothing had happened. After the meeting, my boss approached me, still bewildered by how I managed to maintain composure. I offered no clear answers, simply stating that I didn't know, and retreated to my office. Now, I find myself alone at home for the first time in a long while. I'm at a loss for what to do next. I know I need to leave this apartment. I simply can't live here any longer. Additionally, there's the matter of getting myself checked for STDs, and I suspect I may have injured my hand during the altercation. Update. So, the day after my initial post, I tried calling my mother, but none of my calls went through. I thought about meeting her for lunch to tell her everything, even though it was going to be painful. After numerous failed attempts to reach her, I decided to drive to her house. She needed to know what had happened, no matter how difficult it was going to be. Driving there, I couldn't help but panic about how I would break the news to her. I had to pull over twice to throw up. It's not every day you have to tell your mom that her husband is involved with your fiancé. When I arrived and parked in her driveway, I took a moment to gather my thoughts and calm down. I was still in my car when my mother stormed out of the front door. I got out of my car, and she began yelling at me, accusing me of coming to her home after hitting my father during an argument with LAS. He hurled insults at me, called me an abuser, and demanded that I leave since Elle wasn't ready to forgive me, and she hoped Elle never would. Apparently, my father had taken Elle to our family home and told my mom that Elle and I had a fight, and when he tried to intervene, I had hit him. My mother continued berating me until I finally snapped and said, "Really, Mom? Because your husband is involved with my fiancé. That's why I hit him." If you can't take my word for it, I have a video. I'll send it to you, but don't expect to see me again. I don't want to hear your apology when you finally realize you're just as terrible a mother as my piece of shit father. Her face dropped, and she looked as shocked as I must have looked when I first walked into my apartment and caught them. I took out my phone and sent her the video. My mom turned on her phone, opened the video, and watched it up to the point where I turned on the light. She then put her phone down, looked up at me, and I turned and went to my car. As I backed out of her driveway, I saw her in tears. My heart ached for her, but too much had been said during that argument for me to turn back and forgive her. Back at home, I started packing up everything related to Elle and my family. I boxed up all of Elle's belongings and placed them by the front door. Legally, this has been her residence, so I can't technically kick her out. Her name isn't on the lease, but she avoids conflict, and she comes back. It's likely to cause a lot of problems. Anything associated with my parents, I boxed up and stored away. Despite our close family ties, I've never had a problem cutting toxic people out of my life. I texted Elle's parents to call off the engagement and informed them about her cheating. I thanked them for their kindness and support. Our relationship was still developing, but they had been good to me, and this just added to the hurt. I also asked if they could pick up all of Elle's belongings. I haven't received a response from them yet, but I hope they'll come and take her things so that Elle doesn't have a reason to return here. Update number 2. After my last post, I decided to take action. I needed to get tested, find a therapist, move to a new place, and buy a new bed. I called my doctor's office and asked for tests and a therapist referral. I had my first therapy appointment 2 weeks ago, and we decided to continue once a week. I also got tested last week, but I won't have the results for another week or so. Please cross your fingers for me. I got in touch with a friend who's a real estate agent, and he sent me a bunch of listings. I ended up choosing a refurbished cabin on the outskirts of my city, and I finished moving 2 days ago. Once I was settled in my new place, I called Elle's parents. I told them I'd moved out, and Elle still hadn't picked up her things. I warned them that the landlord would start showing the apartment soon, and had better collect her stuff before it got thrown out. It seems like that lit a fire under them, because the next day, my former landlord thanked me for clearing out the apartment. Nobody knows where I live now, except for the friend who helped me find this place, so I'm confident that neither Elle nor my parents will drop by. The only downside is that I traded a 10-minute walk to work for a 45-minute drive. My phone has been blowing up with texts and calls from Elle, my parents, and some friends. Honestly, I have no interest in talking to anyone except my therapist. At work, I've been keeping to myself. I go in, get my work done, and leave. Occasionally, I have to put on a fake smile and pretend everything is okay when I talk to someone. My boss from my previous post has been checking in on me more, but I don't tell her much either. I just say thanks and that I'll be okay. The truth is, I don't know if I'll be okay. I understand that time heals, but it feels different when you're dealing with multiple losses all at once. A significant part of me feels like it's gone, and there's no way to bring it back. My therapy sessions seem to be going well, although I've never done therapy before, so I don't have much to compare it to. My therapist and I get along fine, and she seems genuinely interested in helping. During the first session, we introduced ourselves and briefly discussed why I was there. The second session went deeper, and we talked about my relationship with my parents. I told her it used to be great until all of this happened. We communicated well, and I grew up in a good home, but all of that means nothing now. She asked why I cut my mother out of my life, and I explained that she said things to me that I wouldn't even say to someone I despised. There's no way to come back from that. At the end of our last session, I gave her the link to my posts here so she could read more about how I feel and what's going on in my head. It's just easier for me to type things out than to speak them. So, if you're reading this, hi Doc. For now, I'm still miserable. I thought I'd be okay by now, not necessarily happy, but at least okay. I know some of it is my fault for not communicating with my friends, but thinking about responding to them just feels exhausting. I know they'll want to get together or come to my new place, but I don't have the energy for it. Until I do, I'll focus on work, attend my appointments, and sit on my back deck, sipping on some cheap whiskey while trying to enjoy the beautiful view. I used to hunt in high school, so maybe I'll take that up again now that I can hunt from my back porch. Final update. In my previous post, I mentioned getting tested for STDs and trying to restart my life. I'm relieved to share that I'm clean. I've settled into my new place, and I must admit my description of it being a refurbished cabin was a bit generous. It was actually refurbished about 25 to 30 years ago and is a bit dated. However, with all the free time on my hands, I decided to give it a real makeover. The only things I didn't do myself were the electrical and plumbing work because I had no clue how to do them, and I didn't want to get electrocuted or deal with sewage pipes. Doing all this renovation work has been incredibly therapeutic and helped clear my head. I'm still seeing my therapist once a week, and to those who suggested it, you probably saved my life. Venting, releasing my frustrations, and receiving guidance have been more beneficial than anything else in my life, past or present. I'm still working at the same company, and I've become more open with some of my coworkers, especially those I'm closer to, as well as my boss from my previous post, all thanks to the advice from my therapist. Also, with her guidance and some of your suggestions, I've reached out to my friends and have been slowly reintegrating into the group. Now, let me give you an update on what's been happening with my family and my ex. I felt ready to have a conversation with my mother, so a little over a month ago, I unblocked her on my phone and reached out. I called her, and she answered almost instantly, sounding panicked. After reassuring her that it was me, I suggested that we meet and talk. She agreed, and a day later, we met at a diner near her house. She was already there when I arrived, and upon seeing me, she began quietly sobbing. We talked for about an hour in total, and before I left, she told me something important. She said that Elle is pregnant. Apparently, Elle showed up at my family's house and told my mom. She didn't know if the baby was mine or my father's, and Elle had been asking if I had been in touch so she could let me know. My mom hadn't informed her, so Elle left without speaking to me. Well, that's the update. I have a lot on my mind, and I'm not sure what to do or how to feel. Thank you for taking the time to read this, and I apologize for rambling on.
My name is Otto Klein. As the owner of several waste management companies, I am known as the Garbage King. I was married to Janet Carson. She was a lawyer and had kept her maiden name for her professional life. Evidently, her whole life is professional since she made no effort to present herself in social settings with anything other than her maiden name. My occupation in waste management was fine with her when I was paying for her expensive law school costs. She decided to go to law school after several years of working as a paralegal and realized she was as sharp as most of the lawyers she worked for. Even though I own several successful companies and make more money than most of the godlike barristers she worked with. Janet started looking down on me as second class soon after she got a job with a law firm. When the late nights, diminished intimacy, and increased disrespect spiked over several weeks, I suspected she had started an affair. Since gods don't mate with common folk, I assumed she was seeing one or more of her fellow lawyers. I quickly decided I needed to get proof that would withstand legal scrutiny. If I had just divorced her, she would have gotten half of my business and considerable wealth. If I could get proof of her infidelity with another of her lawyers, I could probably sue her agency. The law firm would probably pay quite a bit to avoid the embarrassment and possible loss of clients, therefore, I might make enough to compensate for what I would have to give her in divorce. My logic may have been faulty, but that's what it was at the time. That's what I based my actions on. Janet's office has an annual Christmas party. Every year Janet invites me and every year I decline, until this year. She was shocked and immediately tried to come up with reasons for me to stay home. There won't be anyone there for you to talk to, just a bunch of lawyers bragging about their billing hours. Do you really want to sit and hear that all night? I don't care as long as I'm with you, is what I said. As long as I can keep an eye on you and see if I can figure out who your lover is, was what I was thinking. Almost every day before the party, Janet would mention another excuse I could give if I wanted to back out. I didn't fall for it. I told her I was looking forward to going to the party. Even as she was getting ready the night of the gala event, she tried one last time. I hate to see you have a miserable time. Are you sure you want to go? Yes, dear. I knew her problem wasn't that my physical appearance was embarrassing to her. I have been told I am fairly handsome and in good shape, and my suit was Armani. I was no slob. I just worked with garbage. She didn't like it when I said that's what she does too. We got to the party with the second wave of people who were trying to be fashionably late. Most tables were already full, but we soon found one near the dance floor where only one other couple had settled so far. We took our seats and I offered to get drinks for Janet and myself. My first confrontation of the night occurred when I was standing in line to get our beverages. A man who appeared to be one of the lawyers with the firm said, I don't believe I've met you before. Who are you here with? I answered. My wife, Janet Carson Klein. Janet? I didn't think she was still married, he replied. Yeah, we've been married happily for 8 years. Of course, we've been married for over 10 years. He looked stunned for a second, and then started laughing at what he assumed was a joke from me. That proved to me that truth is often funnier than fiction. On more than one occasion, I overheard the Garbage King label used in conjunction with my nearby presence. Their comment was usually followed by snarky laughter. I was not really that upset. I had assumed correctly in the previous years how I would be treated by these snobs. I was considered lower class, if not gutter-level scum. I watched as Janet mingled with various lawyers, paralegals, secretaries, and their spouses or dates for the evening. At the table, she spoke politely with the others seated with us during the meal. When the dancing started, I decided to give it a try. I asked my wife to dance. She looked like she could barely tolerate being seen with me. I didn't care. I tried to dominate the slow dances, but before long I was cut in on several times. Then she managed to accept several invitations from other lawyers for both fast and slow dances. I gave up and just sat back so I could watch her even more closely. It was about an hour after the dancing started that a middle-aged, distinguished-looking man came up to our table. He only looked at Janet. Unlike most others, he did not ask my permission. He was claiming her more than asking her to dance. Janet's face lit up when she saw him. She eagerly accepted and stood up without ever looking at me for my approval. I thought, we may have a winner. My focus was totally on them as observed them dance a slow dance. There was enough in her body language to feed my suspicion, but nothing overt enough to warrant a picture that would be damning. So, was my hunch sufficient as proof of their being lovers? No. Luckily, I had another source of information, an unusual source of information. I had never told Janet that I had been recruited out of college by the CIA. It was found out that I had a highly accurate skill in reading lips. I had several successful covert missions and was being trained in lip reading, a Middle Eastern foreign language. My time in the CIA, however, did not last long, as one of those infamous whistleblowers blew my cover along with everyone else in my section. I was not interested in a desk job, so I left the company. I stood up and positioned myself so I could see what Janet was saying to her dance partner. I was not able to see his face from in front most of the time. This is what I saw. Janet, did you get the room for tonight? Him, room 322. Did you put? Janet, yes, I just put it in his drink a few minutes ago. Him, it shouldn't take. Janet, I can't believe you planned for us to make love in the same room my husband is sleeping in. That is so naughty and dangerous. Him, you love the... Pretend you don't. Janet, are you sure he won't wake up too soon? Him, don't. Plenty of. Are you still? Janet, don't worry about me. If I promised you, you'll get it. Oh, Stanley, I am so ready. That was enough for me. I immediately spilled the rest of the doctored drink on myself and the table. I excused myself and took off toward the restrooms. I passed the restrooms and headed for the exit. I was hoping either I had not taken enough of the drug to be affected yet, or it was not that strong of dosage. I was wrong on both counts. Beeping monitors, bright lights, and alcohol smells were my greeting back to consciousness. It appears I had a car wreck when I fell asleep at the wheel driving home from the party. I looked around and saw a nurse. I was about to ask her a question when I saw Janet come into the room. I immediately sat up and yelled, "Get that bitch out of here." Janet ran out of the room. Once she left, I was still yelling, "She's the one who almost got me killed. I want to talk to a policeman now." The nurse tried to calm me down. The medical staff assumed I was having some kind of psychotic episode. I calmed down and told them, "I'll try to explain this in terms you can understand. I will sue you personally and the hospital in general if you do not get a policeman here in the next 15 minutes. I have been drugged. Do a tox screen for liquid Benadryl and other knockout drugs. I think my wife and her lover almost got me killed. I exaggerated what I knew of the situation, but it worked. Within 15 minutes, a police officer was taking my statement that I had overheard my wife and her lover talking about drugging me and taking my body off somewhere so they could be intimate. I didn't mention that I heard by lip reading. I figured drugging and attempted kidnapping ought to stir some action. I was told I needed to come to the police station after I left the hospital to swear out a complaint. I told them I would unless I got kidnapped or killed by them when I left the hospital. The officer didn't seem particularly concerned for my safety. While I waited to be discharged, a nurse came in to tell me the results of the toxicology report. I had been drugged big time. In fact, based on the amount of drugs I had in my system, if I had drunk the full glass, it would likely have killed me. The hospital staff had reported that to the police already. I heard the phrase attempted murder for the first time. Before long, there was a policeman stationed outside my door, and the second officer who interviewed me was more serious in her interest. I went to my house when I was discharged the next day. A police car passed my house on a regular basis, however. I was not in danger. Janet was not in our house, just all her stuff was. I found out that Janet had been arrested earlier at our house. She and her lover had come here in hopes of convincing me to not tell the law firm about their scheduled tryst in the hotel. That was the only crime they thought they had committed. She and Stanley were charged, however, with attempted murder. I imagine she collapsed when she heard the charge as the police put her in handcuffs. The two lawyers, as you might expect, refused to speak without another lawyer. The district attorney wanted to try the two separately. He thought if Janet saw she was going to be convicted, she would testify against Stanley Proust, her lover and a junior partner with the firm. The DA was not successful. The two cases were intertwined, so they would be tried together. Janet tried to talk to me before the trial. She left messages regarding her innocence in trying to kill me. I guess she didn't think cheating on me mattered since she didn't bother apologizing for that. I ignored the rest of her messages. I quickly withdrew all funds out of our joint accounts and cut all the other financial umbilical cords she was attached to. Her father had to pay her lawyer until her lawyer eventually forced me to return her half. At their trial, the toxicology report of the drugs in my system was the chief evidence. There was a forensic chemist expert in poisonings, knockout drugs, and date rape drugs who told me the scientific name of the drug I was given and the danger I would have been in had I drunk the whole amount. I was the star witness. Lip-reading accuracy, particularly my lip-reading ability, was the main issue for the defense regarding my testimony. How could I possibly be so sure of what I saw? Most lip readers perform at just above 50% accuracy. I had several CI staff testify as to my proficiency being above the average. I even gave a demonstration to the court. The defense's attorney next tried to offer an alternative theory of what happened with the claim that I had actually drugged myself in order to accuse my wife and her lover of attempted murder. If convicted, I would be assured I would get all the assets in the divorce plus a nice settlement from a lawsuit against the law firm. In truth, I wish I had been capable of being that devious. The judge was not impressed by how I expressed in open court how stupid I considered the claim of the defense attorney. When the defense had their turn, neither Janet nor Stanley testified. They had another forensic chemist testify that the drug would likely not have killed me. They had a sign language expert testify as to the general inaccuracy of lip reading. I loved it when my lawyer asked him if some lip readers were more accurate than others. He said, "Of course." Then he was asked if he ever saw me to determine how accurate I was. He had to admit he hadn't. The only other witness was a police officer, Sergeant Haskins, who had interviewed the people who shared our table at the party. He testified that no one at the table had reported they had seen my wife put anything in my drink. The defense rested. The defense's conclusion. No one saw Stanley give Janet any powder. No one saw Janet put anything into my drink. There was no proof I had not done it myself. As soon as the police officer finished testifying, an older lady in the gallery kept trying to get the district attorney's attention. It was causing a disruption, so the district attorney sent an assistant to see what she was so upset about. The assistant hurried back and said, "Recess now." The DA asked for and got a 15-minute recess as the district attorney went back to talk to the lady. I happened to look over at Janet, and she seemed horrified at seeing the woman. She immediately started a strained conversation with her lawyer. The district attorney came back after recess and requested that a rebuttal witness be allowed to testify. He was asked whose testimony was being rebutted. Police Officer Haskins. Janet prodded her lawyer to speak. "Your Honor, I am requesting another recess in which time I will be presenting a change in plea by my client." Stanley and his lawyer went crazy. The word bitch was used several times. In the conference, Janet and her lawyer said she would agree to a guilty plea and a 3 to 5 year sentence in return for testifying against Stanley. The district attorney agreed. The old lady had told the district attorney that the police officer had asked her if she had seen Janet put knockout powder in my drink. He didn't ask if Janet put anything in my drink, so she said no to the knockout drug question. He did not ask her another question. The lady related that she had seen Janet put something in my drink. Janet had told her that it was medicine that would lessen the hangover that I supposedly always got from drinking too much. She said no to it being knockout drugs because she thought it was hangover medicine. It took several months more for Janet's guilty plea and sentence to be announced. Stanley got a new trial which featured Janet as chief witness. She described in detail if Stanley had pursued her and begun their affair. She swore she only wanted to deceive me, and that Stanley had determined the drug and the amount. Stanley countered that he had only done what Janet asked him to do, and that she had purposefully given me too much of the drug knowing the likely deadly consequences. Stanley's lawyer therefore proposed a new theory. Janet had seduced him and planned all along to frame Stanley and kill me. That way she would be rid of a husband who would leave a nice inheritance and get rid of a lover whose position as a junior partner would most likely go to her. My car crash messed up her plan. Stanley cried at the thought that he might be capable of harming another human being. The bottom line was that the jury believed Janet more than Stanley. He was convicted and sentenced to 10 to 15 years in prison. I was allowed to testify at his sentencing hearing. I said with tears in my eyes, "I should not be here today. I should be buried in a grave in Riverside Cemetery. Instead of sitting in that padded chair, my wife's lover should be standing beside my grave helping my wife celebrate their successful disposal of the garbage man. She should have inherited a lot of money. She should be out spending my money with her lover and fellow assassin. Don't be fooled. Neither one of them is upset I almost died. They are upset that I didn't die and got caught. It was my special talent in lip reading that saved my life. I had already drunk about 1/4 of the drink my wife doctored with drugs obtained from her lover when I learned it had been messed with. The amount I did consume was enough to cause me to pass out and crash my car into some bushes. If I had hit a nearby tree, I would probably be dead. Tests for the drugs in my system showed that if I had drunk the entire drink, I would have died as my wife and her lover fucked their brains out in the same room that I was dying in. My wife and her lover say that they only intended to drug me and humiliate me. They both say she mistakenly gave me what should have been a deadly dose of drugs. Even if that were to be true, do they just get to say oops and get a slap on the wrist? I don't think so, but I don't guess my opinion should matter. You see, I'm supposed to be dead. As I said, Stanley got 10 to 15 and Janet got 3 to 5. Janet shouted to me that she was sorry as they were taking her out of the courtroom after Stanley's sentence was announced. I responded, read my lips. I don't care. The divorce was easy with Janet in jail. She didn't contest anything anyway. I think she was actually ashamed of what she did and what almost happened to me. I wound up unintentionally getting what the defense lawyer said I intended to. All the assets from my marriage and, after considerable haggling with the law firm and Stanley, lawsuit settlements. I was already rich. I became richer. Since I am in waste management, you can say I am filthy rich. It was amazing to me how many women in the months after the trial wanted to audition for now vacant position of garbage queen. Not surprisingly, none of those interested were female lawyers. And that's the end of today's story. If you enjoyed it, please give this video a thumbs up and drop a comment below. Your support helps the algorithm push my content further.